is we lived in Coquitlam. We had a house in Coquitlam. My wife had a girlfriend that lived in Lower Hammond, and she decided to go out and visit her, and she spotted this house. And she came home and she says, "We're buying a house out there." So we went out there and looked at it, and ended up buying a house out there so she could be closer to her girlfriend. I live in the lower part of Hammond on Lorne Avenue, which is the main road, almost kitty corner to Tolmie Park, which I understood was donated by the Tolmie family to the community to remain a park forever and ever. Just the people down there, the character of the community. I've always been interested in historical things, so that was sort of my, when I was in high school, I sort of majored in BC history. Well, I guess the one that I can think of is the Hammond days and the heritage walks. Like we used to have unfortunately, I used to put that on, ran out of mine and couldn't do it anymore. But we used to have the Hammond Day, and then we'd have Bernice Geary, she did the heritage walk, and that was sort of the best day of the year down there.
Okay. My name is Len Pettit, and I've lived in Hammond. I'm 67 years old, and I've lived in Hammond 67 years. I live on the west side, Bruce Avenue. Oh yes, I grew up on 203rd Street, First Avenue, and we basically lived in the middle of a pasture. We had 5.5 acres, and there was 5.5 acres on another side, and 10 acres on another side, and a bush in the back. And our playground was, you know, just maybe acreage and a bush. And when we went swimming, we went to Neves Bridge and on the Alouette River. That's what was our swimming hole. And, you know, just it was great. We were told not to go to the Fraser River and the log booms. And we did play on the log booms on occasion. And one friend of mine, he fell in, and we were really scared. So we didn't play on the log booms very much. We used to go down to the golf course and look for golf balls and sell them back to the golfers, and so we did that a little bit. And well, I think basically just the historic nature of it, just the ambience, I guess you want to call it that, of the, I just like the old houses. Like I said, I ride my bike around there, and I just like the way it is. It has this kind of, almost this cluster of old houses. There's a lot of old houses in Maple Ridge, but I think they're kind of spread around. And here you have this historic neighborhood, this cluster, which to me is kind of like a little jewel in Maple Ridge's crown, if you want to put it that way.
I've lived in Hammond 6 years. We moved here, my wife and my wife Leanne, and our baby moved here into Leanne's house that, well, Leanne's grandfather built the house in 1923. And I agreed to come out and live here because of the West Coast Express. We're nice and close to Maple Meadow Station. So we came out with our baby, and we had another baby in the kitchen of the house, and we've become more and more active in the community. To use the moniker that we live in Upper Hammond, just across the tracks on 205th at 114th Avenue. Used to be Waugh Street in Stanton. Those are the historic names of the street. Along what's called Swedish Row, which is named that because some Swedish people who worked at the mill built the houses along there. Of course, this house was built by a Finnish family. I think it's a dream come true for me. I grew up in Kerrisdale in Vancouver, an older home that was also built in the 20s. And that's how I always imagined my future. I didn't, you know, my default reality is living in a single detached house with my family. And here I have it. And I have a backyard, and I have no sidewalks. Sorry. Just this last weekend, we had an event in Hammond that somebody suggested on Facebook, and everybody said, hey, great idea. So we just threw out a press release and put a post up, and suddenly a bunch of people were putting free stuff out with a little free sign. It was called Hammond Treasure Days. And I tootled around the neighborhood on my little electric scooter, and you'd see garage sales and stuff left out, and you'd find treasures. And it was like a little treasure hunt. And then I would bump into people, and I had something to talk about. So that's the confluence of online interactions with people and physical interactions. People would come by our free stuff and look at it, and I'd say, did you see this on Hammond Neighbors? And most of the time the answer was no. And so they didn't know about and they were like, wow, what a great idea. And that kind of lighting up of a new idea where we can just help each other out.
I'm Patina Gardner, and I live in Hammond in Maple Ridge, British Columbia. I've lived here since September of 1984, so 30 years this month. I live in the area that they call Upper Hammond. My home backs onto the Hammond School playing field, and so I'm on 116th Avenue, just off of 203rd. So I'm on one of the older original streets in the area. We just last year got streetlights for the first time in 28 years, so that was a nice surprise to have 5 streetlights go up on our street. So it's made it more inviting. I find there's a real sense of community there. I moved from North Vancouver with my husband and my 2 young sons. They were 2 and 4 at the time. I moved out here, I looked at Hammond Elementary and I went, oh Mike, look, it's our elementary school that we went to type of thing. And because it looked a lot like Ridgeway Elementary, on a much smaller scale, but very similar structure. And people seem to be willing to talk with one another, say hello, ask how one another's doing. Even with the new people that have moved into the area, I've seen the area around us be completely developed. And we used to have grass fields 4 foot high with deer and coyote running through it when we moved there, and that's all housing now. But I'm okay with that. I know things have to evolve and change, but I just find that there seems to be a willingness to sort of communicate with one another, and just that nod, a wave, a hello, a smile, even type of thing seems to happen.
Okay, Debbie Pope, and actually in total 26 years. 13 years in one location, 13 years in my current location. I classified as Upper Hammond. I'm right near Maple Ridge Golf Course. I don't know how we ended up in that area. It was an affordable house, I guess, at the time when we first got married. And like I said, my first house, or our first house in that neighborhood was awesome because everybody was young couples, little kids. They all went to Riverside Elementary, which is now closed. It's Riverside Center. So those neighbors are still our best friends. Yeah. Honestly, I think when I first got married, we bought our first house. It was a brand new subdivision and bought a house there. At that time, it was great. Young families, they all went to the same elementary school, which is now closed. And then where we live now, because I'm near Maple Ridge Golf Course, I'm on a dead-end street. It's very quiet. I love it. My neighbors are great. We all watch out for each other. If a strange car comes down the road, it's a strange car. It's that kind of neighborhood. And it is somewhat quiet. There is more traffic, of course, because of the bridge, but when I'm walking my dog, there's certain areas I still feel safe.
Yeah, it's Rory Defoe, and I've lived in Hammond for about 10.5 years now. I'm in Lower Hammond, a couple of blocks from the tracks. I think, I don't know if I have the right words for it. I think what struck me about Hammond and charmed me with it initially was I felt that it was, for lack of a better term, it was sort of semi-rural. It's not farmland, but it's not a suburban traditional subdivision. It lies somewhere in between. Without the open ditches, it would be very different. If we lose those ditches, I don't know where we're going to put all the water. So I'm in support of keeping those. So I think I like that Hammond has has a feeling of sort of being a little lighter on the land. It hasn't been completely graded flat and over-serviced. And it reflects how, some of these people, when you see the old pictures of what Hammond looked like, that they just basically homesteading on the open ground. So, yeah.
My name is Jennifer Zukerman, and I've lived in Hammond for about 5 years. My partner's been there about 20 years. He brought up his kids in Hammond, so. The area, technically we refer to Upper and Lower Hammond, so I'm in Upper Hammond on Westfield Avenue. I think Hammond is special from, the obvious and first thing to say is it's a neat heritage neighborhood. It's a very historical neighborhood. There's lots of great stories. There's lots of people who have been connected to Hammond for many generations. And so along with that goes neat old houses, and the quirky workers' houses have been all renovated in various quirky fashions. But I think that right now, for me, what makes Hammond a really special place is that we have a really connected community, a really friendly and positive and connected community. And I've never lived anywhere that had that before. And it's really a remarkable feeling like when you walk around the neighborhood, you're either running into people that are your friends or you just haven't met yet, but that are going to be your friends. And so I take a great deal of pleasure out of the sense of the way that Hammond people are together as a community, the people themselves.
My name is Katie Stein. I've lived in Hammond for 11 years now. I live in one of the mill houses in the old part of town, McFarlane House on 205th Street. To me, it feels like an old-fashioned small town, and it was a town laid out in the 20s. And that's what attracted me. I happened to arrive to look at my house from the east. I drove down 114th Avenue West and arrived at my house, and I had gone past the park, seen all the mature trees, and seen houses that attracted me. It was that attracted me. I had bought the house in my head before I got inside the door. We like to sit on our front porch, and we do that a lot in the summer, and watch people. We actually don't have a patio in the back. There's space for one, but we've never developed it because it's so much fun to sit on the front porch. We lived for 10 months in Detroit, a suburb of Detroit, and there is nobody on the streets walking. It's just so much fun to watch the people. It's a very alive and engaged place. And I think that's why I like it. It's alive. It's a real small town.
Okay, my name's Lara Cooley, and I've lived in Hammond for 21 years. I think there's 3 key areas, and the 2 main ones are Upper Hammond on one side of the railway tracks and Lower Hammond, which is geographically lower, on the other side of the tracks. But historic Hammond's also in the center of Upper Hammond, and you know it by the little buildings that are there and the old stores and so on. It's funny, it's home. When my parents moved in '83, I felt betrayed. I really was so upset to move out of Hammond. We were still in Maple Ridge. And my next neighborhood didn't have that neighborhood feel. I grew up, there was a block parent on the corner. There were next door neighbors who were retired, and I would go over to their house, and I even remember the bird's name was Joey. I remember being in friends' swimming pools and backyards and riding up and down, gravel pathways that used to exist back then, and riding my bike all the way out to the reservation. I lived next door to the golf course, so that's quite far for a 10-year-old. And I wanted that back, and we moved again, and it was a cute little complex cul-de-sac area, and a few neighbors were like Hammond, and most of them drove into their garage, lived their life, got back in their cars, and we saw a car leave the garage, and 9 hours later, a car would come back into a garage, and we didn't meet them. And Hammond's not designed like that, so you get to meet your neighbors, and that's what I want. That's what I want to encourage. It's what I want to keep. I think it's neighbors. When I lived in the 70s and 80s in Upper Hammond, our neighbors worked at the mill, so there was that complete connectedness to the community. I don't think the industry allows for that as much anymore with automated machines and whatnot, but people are still neighbors when they're walking their dogs down the street and they're stopping to talk. So I think people have moved into the community and they've learnt that, and it's so easy to slowly lose over time. But I think those who initially set up the Hammond Neighbors Facebook page and website, they nailed it. It's neighbors, you know, the family beyond family.